Awesome. So we'll get started here. We're at 12 o'clock Central. Glad to see how many people could make it here. And we will get started here on a masterclass on contract review. So contract review is a very powerful tool in Steelhead, and there's quite a few different ways it can be used. And it can be used across all different industries and shop types. So definitely throughout the meeting, feel free to jump in at any time, whether it's in the chat and we can get to the chat as we go. But I would highly recommend just unmuting yourself and dropping in your question that way to keep the communication going two ways. So definitely feel free to use either and unmute yourself if you have any questions. So today we'll go over a contract review introduction, just a quick slide on what we'll cover through this presentation. And then we'll actually walk through a demonstration in the hatchery domain. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have time for questions and answers that we didn't get to during the initial presentation. So my name is David Reisenen. I am a deployment engineer with Steelhead based out of our Minnesota office. So contract review in Steelhead can be used in a variety of ways. So there's the work boards and work parts screen, which I'll show you. In general, with the contract review step or node in Steelhead, you can see every step of the process, all operator instructions, all specs, anything that will be seen in Steelhead throughout the whole process, you can see at contract review. You can also edit any of these things. So if you need to make a change to operator instructions or a spec parameter or time and tank, whatever it might be, you can adjust that at time of contract review. So it's a very good last kind of checkpoint before you begin production. And again, it can be used in any situation. If you're heavy spec driven, it's a great time to review your specs. If you don't do any specs, but you just like a review after order entry to make sure the part number and process is set up correctly, contract review is a great step to add to any of your processes. So with contract review, you can assign certain users who must sign off on it before it can be moved on. On the contract review step on the workboards, there's a sidebar and recipe tree to see all steps the parts will go through. And then there's things such as the part number data, part process node specific instructions. So just a quick side note on process nodes, if that term is confusing to you. A process node in Steelhead is basically a step of the process. So if you have masking, there will be a masking process node in Steelhead. There's a work order comment section. So maybe you want to make a comment specific to that order and not specific to the part number. You can make a comment for anyone down the line to see. I've mentioned specs quite a few times already. This is a great chance to view all applied specs and all parameters that the specs will be running to. So that is just a quick overview. Most of this class here will be spent within Steelhead showing how to set it up and go over any questions on the setup afterwards. Any initial questions before we dive into Steelhead? And again, feel free to use the chat or unmute yourself and we can walk through it, whatever you have on your mind. Alrighty, so I've got Steelhead pulled up here. This is the main homepage that I'm sure many of you have seen, whether in demos or playing around with it on your own. So with contract review, there is a contract review dashboard that many do use. This shows all pending contract reviews. It shows the part number, work order, sales order, customer, and the specs assigned. So this is one spot you can go to quickly see all pending contract reviews. And you can also do your contract reviews from this page here by simply clicking on review. And we'll dive more into this after the setup portion of it. So that is on the homepage contract review. With the setup, it'll be on the process tree itself. So I have processes, and we'll just go to this anodizing 2 process here. So we have a whole setup of process nodes that I mentioned. So receiving contract review is the second one here. So when you add this node to your process, it has its own type. It's a contract review node type, and this allows you to access all of the contract review functionality. Within the node itself, you can add users. So who should be able to sign off on contract review. So this will have your full user list, and you can assign any amount of users that you want to be able to sign off on it. And any one of them can go in there and move the job along. So if I wanted to add myself, and maybe we'll add Dean. So us two, Dean or myself, would be able to sign off on this contract review step and allow parts to move on to the rest of the process. Besides setting up a contract review node, you can also assign users to any step of the process. So if I wanted a blasting user to sign off on the job before we move it into production, I can go to the blasting node and add a user. So not change the type, but just add a user, and maybe Chet is our blasting lead. So we need Chet to review this job at contract review before we move it into production. So that would require Chet to go in there and pass the blasting sign off on contract review. So the two things with setup on the process are whether you want a contract review node. So a lot of times it can come at any point of the process, but most often will usually be at the beginning when you want to preview a job before it moves into production. You can also assign a user to a node. So like blasting, for example, we added Chet, so that would require Chet to sign off on the blasting sign off at contract review before we can begin the job. Any initial questions on the setup portion of it? Alrighty. So that is on the process tree setup with the contract review node type, and then we also have assigning users to nodes. I have this other process here that we'll use for this work order example today, where we have a contract review node at the beginning of the process, and then we assigned users to the anodizing node. So we want anodizing to sign off. It could be any of the anodizing team to sign off on the job before we move it along. So I have created a work order to go through the anodizing process. And if I go to work boards, so again, we could either go to contract review, or we can also create a work board for contract review. So if I go to the contract review work board, we have our orders start to stack up here that we need to move along. The icon here on the left shows a contract review is required on this job. So we have this job for BAE systems. We see it's a new part, so maybe we want to make careful look at this one. It's a new part, first time running it. Quantity, this is the typical work board view, and we just added one for specific to contract review. So if I go to work these parts, here is the contract review screen. So this screen will be different than any of your other work boards. If I just do a quick comparison of a standard work board, you see just one screen here related to that step. The contract review work board will give you everything that these parts are going to go through. So we see work order files. We have a nice purchase order here, so we can review that when we do our review of this job. You can see every step. I mentioned the recipe tree. This shows every step this job is going to go through, starting at receiving, which we already clicked through, to contract review, which we're at now. And then it'll go into the anodizing portion of the job. And you see this little icon here as we added a few users to the anodizing node to require a sign off there before the job is moved along. So this shows every step the job will go through on the left side. And then here, if I click on contract review, you'll get some additional information. So you have all applied specs. You have the contract sign-offs required. So we have the contract review sign-off, and then the anodized sign-off as we added users to the anodized step itself. So before we can, if I tried to move this job along right now, I cannot move it. It's stopped by 2 failing or missing contract reviews. So this is where the functionality of contract review is extremely powerful, whether it's adding instructions for the operators, checking that your job matches the purchase order, checking that all steps are included, checking that the specs are accurate. All of that can be done on this one screen, this one dashboard here. So first, if I'm doing a review of a job, very naturally I'd want to compare it to the purchase order. So I might just quick do a glance here. I see it's black anodized per mil A625. I see we have applied that spec. That's good. There's masking and plugging included on the PO, but I do not see masking and plugging on our recipe tree. So that'd be a red flag for me right there, that this job was not set up correctly at order entry. So I can go down to the bottom of the screen here and edit the work order recipe. So we've missed masking on this job, but we caught it here before production. So I'm gonna go in and edit the recipe for this job. So you have these options here of removing a step, adding a new node, or adding a node branch. So the node branch would be adding a branch to anodizing, whereas a new node is a whole new step of the process. So I'm gonna add in our masking step. And select the masking type here. We'll go plug. And it bumped it down here below anodize. Can bump this up wherever you want it in the process. So we'll go right to masking and plugging here after contract review. So that would be a good catch by the contract review team. Viewing the PO, they see that there should be masking and plugging on this job. Viewed the recipe tree on the left side and saw that it was missing, and we can add that in. So now we have the spec, we have masking and plugging, we see quantity 12 and quantity 12, so everything's looking good now there. If you wanted to add any instructions for your operators, you can click on any step of the process and see what their workboard looks like. So masking and plugging, this is what the masking operator will see on his workboard when he opens up that job once it gets to him. Same thing at racking. So you have the racking workboard, and maybe we want to add in a picture of racking for them to view when that job gets there. So I could go to the bottom right corner, and you have these options for obviously production related things such as quality holds or work order notes or labels. But I'm going to go to part number process node file. So that's saying I'm going to add a file to that step of the process. And I can add in a racking photo to show how these parts should be racked. Along with adding a picture, you can use Steelhead's markup function. Maybe there's a specific area they need to pay attention to. We need to rack through these holes. So I'm going to circle this hole and add that in. So now when these parts get to racking, the racking team will have this photo available on their workboard. They'll see the picture, they'll see the markup, and that's added right from this contract review screen instead of having to navigate to the part number page. Same thing with instructions. If you needed to add instructions to a certain step, let's say, so we've added this masking step, and we see there's already instructions for plug all holes for this part number. If you needed to add any additional notes, you can use the part number process node description. So similar to the process node file, this will add a description or notes to that process step. So we have plug all holes, and maybe you just add a do carefully or whatever you want to add for notes for your masker or your masking team. Those will show up on their workboards when these parts arrive. So that's adding part number process node files and descriptions for your operators. Again, this screen here, anything you click on, this is exactly what the operator is going to see when these parts are at their step. You can also view all specs that are applied, all spec fields that are applied on a process node step. So we have soak clean here. I can view the soak clean time. You see a minimum of 5 minutes, 10 seconds, maximum of 10 minutes. You can see that they're going to have to input a soak clean temperature. So all these are viewable on the process node itself. And we can also go back to the contractor view node and do edit part number specs. So this is a great chance if you're working a lot with specs and spec parameters. If I do edit part number specs, I can see all of these specs that are applied on this part number, what's going to be applied on this job. So we see we have this NADCAP anodizing spec that is referenced and used. And this is that soap clean time we're looking at, 5 minutes, 10 seconds. You see rinses. Maybe we know this one should have a much higher rinse. You can, if you have spec editing permissions, you can come in and edit the spec parameter. And let's say this one should be a minimum of 40 seconds and a max of 1 minute. So this, we want a little bit more rinse on these parts. We can change the spec field parameter at contractor view. You can also scroll down and view all the parameters on the spec. This one obviously has a lot of inputs as it's a anodizing job going through a lot of different tanks. You have minimum targets, maximums. You can just do a quick scroll through and view all the values. And again, you can change any of these spec field parameters here at contractor view. So I think that looks good. I can do finish, and now we've edited that spec parameter for the rinse, soap clean rinse. So again, that was through edit part number specs, and then going down to the spec field parameters. So I'm going to do a quick refresh here, and we can take a look at the spec field update on soap clean rinse. You see our minimum has changed to 40 seconds, maximum is now a minute. So that's good. That's what they'll see on their scanner when these parts get to the soap clean rinse tank. So just a quick recap of what we've gone over on this contractor view screen here so far. You can view the purchase order as order entry added this to the work order. So now this is a chance to review. We saw masking and plugging. So we used the edit work order recipe feature here to add the masking step to the process. You can add notes, files to any step of the process. So we added a racking photo for the racking team. We added masking notes for the masking team. And then you can also edit the part number specs on this screen. So we edited the soap clean rinse to time because we knew that one should have a higher rinse than it currently is set up for. So once all of this is done, you've confirmed everything on your end, you can pass the contractor view or fail the contractor view. So if you fail it, you won't be able to move the parts along. If you pass it, that's saying you've reviewed everything and contractor view looks good, everything is set up correctly. So I'm gonna pass that, and Chet has passed the anodized portion he was reviewing on his end. So now we're able to move the parts along to the next step of the process. We don't see that blocker anymore for required contractor view. Any questions on, I know I've covered a lot here on this screen, any questions on the contractor view dashboard and any of the functionality of this page here?
Yeah, I was wondering a bit about those permissions you mentioned. Do they tie in with the permissions on other modules of the site, like specs and timer dashboard and what have you?
Yes, yeah. So any parameter, like if you don't have permission to edit specs or work with specs, you shouldn't have. You won't be able to edit specs on contractor view either.
All right.
And yeah, so viewing contractor view as well. Like this dashboard here is permission based on who can read contractor view. Good question.
So a question on the BIOS. I've noticed, I love this feature. I love that I can see everything. But once the work orders are closed, I lose all visibility and all my objective evidence is gone. that contract review is been performed.
So you're saying you do contract review on an active order, you move those parts all the way through, you're finished up, and then you lose that tracking?
Yes. And I don't know of any other way to actually look at a traveler as a whole like this in the system, which is kind of critical during NADCAP audits and
great question, great point. So with contract review, there's actually a feature currently being built out on looking at contract reviews for past work orders. So that's exactly the situation you're discussing there. So that is a feature being built. And then a current one that can be used as a part number template can be built out on the part number level. There's the open PDF. So whatever kind of information you need on a part number level, we can customize a PDF for you to show all spec measurements, all process steps, notes, and that was kind of built out for that NADCAP area, being able to print out or view a processing sheet of what a part number goes through. But as far as on a work order level, that historical contract review feature will be exactly what you're describing.
Do you know when that feature is going to be released?
I don't have a date. I don't know an exact date, but I believe it should be upcoming here, hopefully in the next month or so.
Okay, thank you.
David, could we put that sign off on the cert, the quality cert as well, to say like, hey, Chet signed off and David signed off on a Tuesday?
The contract review sign off?
Correct.
Yeah, that should be, if you wanted to bring that in as a native field on a cert, I believe that should be possible. I'll have to check the cert payload, but I'm sure that's something we can add in if it's already not possible, when the contract review is signed and who signed it.
Perfect.
Any other questions on this contract review dashboard here? And then just a reminder on the process setup itself. There's the two options of either a contract review node type or just adding users to a step. So if you wanted the blasting team, or maybe you have a lead and degrease that should review those instructions before the job is released, you can simply add users to the node on who has to sign off on it before it's moved along. So setup is very easy and very controllable on who can do these things. Anyone have an example of current contract review you do now, and maybe if this seems to match what you do, or if there's any other questions you have on how your workflow would fit in here?
How about those contract review users? Are they allowed to manage the opt-in and opt-outs that are right under the user selection page?
On the process setup?
Yeah, they can contract review users manage opt-in and outs on the menu listed there?
Yeah, on who can do the contract review?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's going to come down to the same permissions. If you have permissions to write process nodes and have the right permission set up, they'll be able to choose who can sign off on it. Alrighty, yeah. So the most haven't seen an industry or a job shop that can't use contract review. I think everyone can use it. It's just a matter of if you want to include it. So there's obviously it can come down to very specifics of times and tanks or temperatures, or it can be just as basic as just another review step of a recipe tree. Second check for qualified people who know the processes, and they can review it before the parts are moved into production and released to the operators. It's a great chance to catch mistakes, catch missing information, and also add any instructions, files, pictures you want, such as adding a picture of rack parts for the racking team to see exactly how to do their job. It's also a great chance. I know most shops are comparing one-to-one to the purchase order. It's a great chance to do a final review of the purchase order and make sure you have everything matching on your end to what the customer is expecting. Alrighty. Any other questions on this before we just release it to everyone for Q&A?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Where you showed that you can add that photo that shows the racking.
Yeah. Yep.
Is it possible that we can tie that photo to that part number? And anytime that part is on an order, it automatically puts that up there, so we don't have to do that every time we see it, because we do have a lot of repeat work.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So that's exactly what this is doing here. Is this racking picture will show up at racking every time this BP123 part number comes through.
Okay, perfect.
So yeah, this is a part number process node file. So this will be on the part number every time when it gets to racking. The other options on uploading files here, you have a work order file. So if you wanted a file just for this order, you could add a work order file, and then it wouldn't follow that part number anymore. You can add a part number file. This would show up at every step of the process. So this would commonly be used just a picture of the part. Here's what the part looks like, and you would see that at every step, making sure you're working with the right parts. So you do have the option to add part number as a whole, part number to a specific step. Otherwise, you can add a file just to the work order. But that's a general overview of Contractor View and Steelhead. Again, an extremely powerful tool to review jobs before you release to production and allow the experts to sign off on it before the operators see the parts.